The subpoena was handed to me in the hallway outside exam room 4, right between a blood pressure cuff and a tray of sterile gloves. The woman who served it didn't raise her voice or make a scene. She just asked if I was Dr. Maren Keller, waited for my nod, and slid the envelope into my hand as if it were another chart. Then she walked away with the same calm stride my nurses use when they're protecting the schedule. I stood there for a moment, feeling the papers weight like something physical. My patients were already seated behind doors. My day was mapped in 15-minute blocks. I didn't open it yet. I told my assistant I'd handle it later, and stepped into the next room with the envelope tucked under my clipboard. I'm 42. I run an orthopedic practice that I built from a rented suite and a borrowed X-ray machine into something established enough that hospital administrators stop calling me young and start calling me busy. My money comes from surgery, from equity in the practice, and from 2 small commercial properties I bought before rates spiked. I'm not flashy. My power is functional. I make decisions quickly and people adjust around them. That's why the subpoena felt wrong. Not scary wrong, like a screw in the wrong thread. I didn't open it until lunch. I sat at my desk, closed the door, and read. It wasn't about malpractice, not taxes, not divorce. It was about a nonprofit I'd never heard of being investigated for misrepresentation and financial irregularities. And my name was on it, not as a donor, as an officer. The document said I was the treasurer. I remember staring at that word, treasurer, as if it might change if I looked away and back. My stomach didn't drop. My shoulders didn't tense. My body did something quieter. It went still, the way it does before an incision. I started running backward through the last year, looking for the moment my name could have been placed somewhere without my noticing. I knew the moment. It began at a museum gala I didn't want to attend but did anyway because my practice had sponsored a table. I'd promised my office manager I would show my face. I wore a black dress that didn't photograph well and told myself I'd stay for 90 minutes. He found me near the silent auction, standing alone, reading donor plaques like they were clinical notes. He wasn't dressed like the other men. No shiny confidence. No predatory charm. He wore a simple suit that fit well and moved like someone used to being in rooms full of money without chasing it. He said he was grateful I'd come, not as a line, as a statement like I'd already done something. He introduced himself as Evan, said he coordinated development for a local arts foundation, and said my sponsorship had funded an adaptive program for kids with injuries. He didn't ask me about my work. He told me a specific outcome. A teenage dancer who'd broken her ankle and now had a modified brace that let her perform again. I noticed how he gave me a story instead of a compliment. We talked for 10 minutes, then 20. He didn't press for my number. He didn't ask whether I was married. He asked what I thought made people heal faster, structure or hope. I answered structure, and he said hope worked better when it had a container. He spoke my language without copying it. The following week, he emailed through the foundation, thanking me for staying engaged and attaching a 1-page overview of programs. It was clean, readable, not needy. At the bottom, he added a line saying he'd love my input on a community initiative involving physical therapy access. Input, not money. That's how he came into my orbit, through competence and alignment, through the kind of soft, purposeful contact that doesn't feel like pursuit. At the time, it seemed reasonable to respond. Now, holding a subpoena that said I was the treasurer of something I hadn't agreed to hold, I could see the first hinge clearly. He hadn't asked for my wallet. He'd asked for my credibility. After that, he learned how to stay present without taking space. He didn't text casually. He emailed through the foundation account, always during business hours, always with an agenda that didn't require a response the same day. He framed everything as optional. Review if helpful. Ignore if busy. I noticed how often I didn't ignore it. The initiative he wanted my input on was about access. Sliding scale physical therapy sessions funded by donors who liked concrete outcomes. He sent a draft proposal and asked one question: whether the clinical assumptions made sense. They did. I told him so, corrected 2 terms, suggested a 3rd outcome metric. He revised it overnight and sent it back with the changes highlighted, not defended. He thanked me and said the clarity would help with grant language. A week later, he asked if I'd be willing to join a short call. Not a meeting, a call. He said the board wanted a clinician's perspective, and that it would carry more weight coming from someone who wasn't on staff. I agreed because it was 20 minutes and because I knew how to speak to boards. On the call, he stayed quiet. He introduced me, then stepped back. When questions came, they came to me. I answered cleanly. No advocacy. No promises. When it ended, the board chair thanked me for grounding the conversation. Evan didn't celebrate afterward. He said it had gone as expected. He said predictability was a gift in fundraising. After that, my name began to circulate lightly. Not publicly. Internally. He'd forward an email and say they appreciated your framing. Or your language helped close this. I didn't feel used. I felt effective. We didn't see each other socially until months later, when the foundation hosted a small dinner for recurring sponsors. He seated me between two donors who wanted to talk about outcomes, not optics. He checked in once to ask if I needed anything, then disappeared back into the room. I noticed that he never drank more than half a glass of wine. At some point, he asked if I'd consider an advisory role. Not on the board. Too visible, he said. More like an informal sounding board as they scaled. He said nonprofits broke when governance outran capacity. He said he liked to prevent that. I told him I didn't have time for formal obligations. He said he understood. He said that was why he was asking for something informal. That word again. After that, small documents started coming my way. Budgets. Projections. Drafts of grant narratives. He didn't ask me to approve them. He asked whether anything felt off. I scanned quickly, flagged inconsistencies, sent them back. Once, he asked if he could list me as a professional reference for a hospital partnership pitch. He said it would reassure them that clinical leadership supported the mission. He said it wouldn't imply governance. I hesitated for half a second. Then I said yes. The pitch succeeded. He emailed to thank me and said the hospital liked that the foundation had real operators nearby. He said credibility traveled faster than brochures. That phrase stayed with me. We never slept together. We never even crossed into flirtation. What we had was alignment, purpose, the comfortable rhythm of two people who understood systems and respected lanes. That's why, when he sent a DocuSign link months later and said it was just a formalization of what I was already doing, language the lawyers require for transparency, I didn't open it right away. I trusted that if something mattered, he would have explained it. I signed the next morning between patients, skimming for anything that looked like liability. It didn't look like liability. It looked like acknowledgement. The shift didn't announce itself. It accumulated. After the DocuSign, nothing changed immediately. No new requests. No escalation. If anything, Evan pulled back slightly. Fewer emails. Longer gaps. I noticed the absence the way you notice a monitor going quiet, only because you've gotten used to the hum. Then the language changed. He stopped asking whether things made sense and started saying they were in place. He referenced decisions I didn't remember making but recognized as reasonable. He used my name in sentences that framed closure, not consultation. Once Marin signed off, we were able to move forward. That line appeared in a forwarded email thread I wasn't originally on. I read it twice. The phrasing was ambiguous enough to be defensible. Signed off could mean reviewed, could mean acknowledged, could mean exactly what it said. I told myself it was shorthand. The foundation began growing faster than before. New programs, new partnerships, a sudden fluency with language that usually took nonprofits years to learn. I recognized my own edits echoed back in grant narratives, expanded, polished, amplified. Felt like success. One afternoon, Evan asked if I could step into a meeting briefly, 15 minutes, he said. A donor had questions about financial oversight, and the board treasurer was traveling. He said my presence would reassure them. I reminded him I wasn't the treasurer. He said of course not. He said it was just optics. I joined the meeting between cases, still in scrubs under a jacket. I answered questions about fiscal discipline, about controls, about what good stewardship looked like in organizations that handled vulnerable populations. I spoke in generalities, careful not to commit to specifics. The donor nodded, satisfied. The meeting ended early. Afterward, Evan thanked me and said it helped to have financial leadership in the room. That phrase landed differently. I corrected him. I said I wasn't leadership. He apologized immediately. Said he misspoke. Said things blurred when people wore many hats. I let it go. 2 weeks later, I received an email from a bank requesting verification of my role for account documentation. The foundation was opening a new operating account, and my name was listed as an authorized officer. I assumed it was an error. I forwarded it to Evan with a short note asking him to correct it. He called instead. He sounded calm, appreciative. He said it was temporary. He said the bank required a medical professional with independent income to satisfy a compliance threshold while they transitioned to a new treasurer. He said my name would never touch the account. He said this was paperwork, not practice. I told him to remove me. He said removal would delay funding already committed. He said delay could jeopardize programs already promised. He said it would look strange to donors if leadership changed mid-quarter. I noticed how the problem had shifted. It wasn't about accuracy anymore. It was about momentum. I said I needed time to think. He said, of course. He said he trusted my judgment. That night, I pulled the DocuSign back up. I read it slowly this time, not as a physician skimming risk disclosures, but as someone looking for implication. The language was careful. No salary. No daily duties. But there it was, folded into a paragraph about interim governance during expansion. Officer capacity as required for continuity. Continuity. I slept poorly, not because I felt deceived, but because everything I'd agreed to made sense on its own. Each step had been reasonable. Each yes defensible. That was the part that bothered me most. The next morning between surgeries, I checked the state registry. The foundation's public filing listed officers: President, Secretary, Treasurer, Maren Keller, MD. That was the first moment my hands shook. Not with fear, with precision. I didn't call him right away. I finished my surgeries. I dictated notes with the same cadence I always used. I washed my hands longer than necessary, watching the water run clear, giving my body time to align with what my mind had already decided. By the time I left the clinic, the word treasurer had lost its shock and gained weight. At home, I laid everything out on the dining table like pre-op imaging. Emails, attachments, the DocuSign agreement, board decks I'd glanced at and forgotten. I wasn't looking for drama. I was looking for sequence. The pattern was clean. He hadn't lied outright. He'd layered. Each document true enough alone, arranged so the sum created authority without announcement. My name functioned as ballast, medical credibility anchoring financial trust. I saw how often my absence had been filled with assumption, how often silence had been interpreted as consent. The next morning I called him. He answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting. I told him I'd seen the filing. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I said one sentence. I was not, and had never agreed to be, the treasurer of his foundation. He paused, then said he understood why it looked alarming. He said the filing was provisional. He said the state required an officer designation to process pending grants, and that my name had been used temporarily to avoid freezing funds. He said it would be corrected once the new treasurer on board. I asked when that would be. He said soon. I asked why he hadn't told me. He said he hadn't wanted to burden me with administrative noise. He said he assumed, given my level of involvement, that the distinction was formal rather than functional. I asked whether any money had moved under my name. He said no. Then corrected himself. He said not under my name with reference to it. That phrasing ended the conversation. I told him to remove my name from every filing, account, and document by the end of the day. I said I would not participate in a transition. I said I would not wait for onboarding. I said this was not a negotiation. He said immediate removal could trigger audits. He said auditors liked continuity. He said abrupt changes raised questions. I said questions were preferable to misrepresentation. There was a long silence. Then he said something quieter. He said he hadn't expected me to react this strongly. He said he thought I valued outcomes over optics. He said the programs mattered more than titles. I told him my license mattered more than his timelines. That was the first time his tone shifted. Not angry, controlled. He said I was overestimating my exposure. He said nonprofit officers were rarely held personally liable. He said my concern was disproportionate. I told him he no longer had permission to assess my risk. When we hung up, I didn't sit down. I opened my laptop and called my attorney. I said I needed immediate corrective filings, written notice of non-consent, and documentation of removal. I didn't explain the story. I didn't need to. By afternoon, letters were sent. By evening, Evan texted once. He said he wished I'd trusted him enough to let him manage the exit cleanly. He said involving lawyers made things adversarial. I didn't respond. At 10 that night, an updated filing appeared on the state site. My name was gone. I slept for 4 hours, woke before dawn, and lay still, listening to my house settle. The relief wasn't emotional. It was structural, like pressure equalizing after a seal breaks. What I didn't know yet was how much damage had already been done. The damage announced itself through other people. 2 days after my name was removed, my office manager forwarded me an email she didn't know how to categorize. It was from a regional hospital partner, thanking the foundation's financial leadership for ensuring fiscal accountability during expansion, and noting how reassuring it was to see a practicing physician listed in an officer role. She asked if I wanted her to respond. I told her no. I told her to forward it to my attorney. After that, the calls started. Not panicked. Curious. A grant administrator asking whether my role had changed. A donor liaison wanting to confirm governance updates. A bank compliance officer requesting clarification about a signature card that had already been processed. Each interaction carried the same undertone. My presence had mattered. Its removal required explanation. I realized then that Evan hadn't just borrowed my credibility forward. He'd spent it backward. My attorney moved quickly. Notices of correction. Letters of non-affiliation. Requests for written confirmation that no funds had been disbursed under my authority. Most responses were polite. Some were defensive. One asked whether I would consider staying on to preserve continuity. I declined everything. What I didn't expect was the audit. It wasn't criminal. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of audit that arrives when paperwork outruns reality. The state flagged discrepancies between officer listings and actual governance practices. Donors froze contributions. Accounts were reviewed. The foundation's growth stalled mid-sentence. Evan called once during that week. I didn't answer. He emailed instead, longer than usual, explaining how hard he was working to stabilize things. He said the scrutiny was excessive. He said nonprofits were punished for ambition. He said he never would have put me at risk intentionally. I read it carefully. There was no acknowledgement of consent. Only outcome. Only effort. Only his stress. By Friday, a colleague from another practice called me privately. She asked whether I was all right. She said my name had come up in a conversation about nonprofit governance, as a cautionary tale. That was when I felt something sharp for the first time. Not fear. Anger. Not at him. At myself, for underestimating how quietly reputation could be rerouted once it left your hands. The audit concluded within weeks. No fraud charges. No criminal findings. But the foundation was required to refile, restate governance history, and return several grants pending review. Evan was placed on administrative leave by his own board. I learned that from a public notice, not from him. The last message I received from Evan was short. He said he wished I'd trusted his intentions more than the paperwork. He said things might have resolved differently if I hadn't escalated so quickly. I deleted it without replying. because escalation was the only thing that had stopped the slide. After the audit closed, the noise faded unevenly. Some days were completely normal. Surgery, consults, follow-ups, the familiar choreography of bodies healing on predictable timelines. Other days carried echoes. Someone asking a question half a beat too carefully. An administrator clarifying a detail that didn't need clarification. Nothing overt. Just a thin residue of association that hadn't fully evaporated yet. I didn't defend myself. I corrected facts when they surfaced and let the rest pass. Explanations prolong things. Accuracy shortens them. The foundation dissolved quietly 3 months later. Not with headlines, not with scandal. A notice filed. Programs reassigned. Language about strategic consolidation. Evan's name disappeared from donor emails the way mine eventually had. Without ceremony, without apology. I never spoke to him again. What surprised me was how long my body held on to the incident after my mind had closed it. I caught myself double-checking documents I'd never double-checked before. Pausing longer over signature lines. Reading the footer of emails twice. It wasn't fear. It was recalibration. My internal systems tightening tolerances after discovering how far they'd stretched without triggering alarms. One evening, weeks later, I stayed late at the clinic to finish notes. Everyone else had gone. The building made its after-hours sounds. HVAC cycling, distant elevators, the muted click of doors resetting. I sat alone in my office and opened the original DocuSign file one last time. Not to analyze it. To see it as it had been when I signed, harmless, efficient, forgettable. I could still understand why I'd said yes. That mattered. This hadn't happened because I was careless or lonely or flattered. It had happened because I was competent, because I moved quickly, because I trusted systems that usually worked when populated by adults acting in good faith. Those traits didn't need to be erased. They needed boundaries. I closed the file and deleted it. At home that night, I cooked without distraction. Chopped vegetables slowly, noticing the resistance of the knife through the board. Ate standing at the counter, then sat anyway just to feel the difference. The house was quiet in a way that didn't demand vigilance. Later, in bed, I thought about the moment in the hallway when the subpoena had been placed in my hand. How wrong it had felt, not frightening, just misaligned. Like my name had been rotated a few degrees off-center in a structure that relied on precision. That sensation had been accurate. What I understood now was that my life worked because my name meant something specific in specific contexts with specific limits. When those limits blurred, consequences didn't announce themselves loudly. They accrued. The final scene didn't involve him. It involved a patient. A young woman post-op, anxious about whether she'd ever return to her job. I explained the plan, the structure, the timeline. I watched her breathing slow as certainty replaced fear. Not hope certainty. When she thanked me, it was for clarity. That night I slept deeply. No adrenaline. No review loops. Just rest. In the morning I signed exactly what I meant to sign, spoke only where I was responsible, and moved through my day without carrying anyone else's structure on my back. Everything fit again.